Good, so welcome. And I want to congratulate you all for choosing this session because, no, seriously, because in this session you are guaranteed to come out smarter. And so my name is Tani. I've done this session many times, so I'm extremely smart, but you'll be able to do it too. And we'll talk about version 2 scopes. By the way, I told the folks, you can move here if you want closer. There's room for everybody. You can stay there. Most of the time I'll be there. I just promised it, actually. I'll probably just stand here all the time. So, again, welcome to all of you and all of you. So we'll be talking about Smart 2 scopes, and actually Patrick here was asking me if I'll be talking about fine-grained scopes, and I told him only fine-grained scopes. So let's really talk about what we'll do, what's the goal of this session, and to set some expectations. So what I'd like to do is all of you, each and every one of you, should be able to use fine-grained scopes efficiently. That's the goal. Now, to use this, you need to know FHIR, you need to know SMART, OAuth, but we're not going to cover that today. Okay, so we're not going to cover OAuth basics. We're not going to cover how to set it up, what's an OAuth server, an OAuth client, a resource server. We're not going to do all that stuff today, or Smart and FHIR basics. But don't worry, if this is of interest to you, so I put some QR codes. You can some developer community posts that you can use and read and learn how to do all of that. And there's a course, by the way, that Patrick built. So it costs, well, you can talk about that later. But what we are going to cover today is we will have some recap, so don't worry, of some of the basics. And then we'll move on to the focus, which will be the fine-grained scopes. And of course, we'll want to look at how InterSystems FHIR Server supports all of that. And the highlight will be a live demo of how this works. So that's what we're going to cover. And based on this is our agenda of what we'll be talking about. On the left side, you see like the breadcrumbs, so you can always see where we are. If I see people going like this, I'll understand what happened to them. So let's start, and this will be a kind of a build-up of where we're going with these scopes. So anybody who has a FHIR server with a FHIR repository and uses basic authentication, what really this means is that this person, this user or client, can get into the FHIR repository or can't. It's a kind of, you're in or out. Now, if they're in, what can they do in the FHIR repository? Anything they want. They can read anything, change anything, that's it. Okay, that's basic authentication. Now, some of you might know that when you set up a FHIR repository, you can define what's called a required resource. This is not a FHIR resource, this is a IRIS security resources. The same resources that, let's say, protect databases or pages on a portal and stuff. So you can do that. And then what you can do is that the user or the client that connects can either read or write. But again, it's read or write for the whole repository. But you can do that. On other stages, and here we're already coming to SMART, this was version 1. So this you have to set up the auth and all that, right? All that stuff. So you need to set up an auth client. Again, we're not going to get into that right now. And once you do that, then you can already define per resource type if you can read or write, right? And here we're getting into scopes already. So a scope could look like this, and you have observation, so that's the resource type. And in this case, we can read to the observation. Read meaning we could probably also, if I don't know the ID, can I do? I can query, I can search, right? So read in this sense means that. That was version 1. Version 2 came along, and again, this is observation, and we can read it. Version 2 came along, and again, we have to set up OAuth, we have to set up the OAuth client. And version 2 said, well, it's not only just read or write, it's CRUDs, right? It's create, read, update, delete, and search. So we have all of these. And again, I can set up my scope, I can say observation, and I can say only, let's say, create and update. By the way, if in version 1, if I'd say write, they could also delete. But here I can control that little thing also. That was version 1 and version 2. And what we want to focus on today is version 2 with the granular, with the fine-grained scopes. And here what you can do, again, You have the various resource types. You can do those same screws. What we can also do is you could filter. You can say, I don't want you to access all of my observations, all of my conditions, all of my patients. No, only specific ones. Or I don't want you to access specific ones. So we can have this kind of SOAP. And we say observation, that's the resource type. We have read and search, that's the permissions we give. And we have the filter. In this case, only observations with the category of laboratory. Now, there's a longer syntax to that. Also, you can put the system, but that's the value that usually works. So this is what we want to focus on today. So again, this is a quick recap of what we're talking about when we say smart. So we have the CRUDs that we just spoke about. We have what's called the scope context or the scope type, which you have user, patient, and system. So we have 3 times ago. We're not going to get into right now all the differences in all of these. And the idea is that the client gets the token from the authorization server with the scopes, goes with the scopes to the FHIR server, which is us, and we enforce these scopes. And we'll soon see what it means to enforce these scopes. Well, that's what we do. So this is a syntax of what a scope would look like. So in the beginning, we have the scope type, right? So let's say patient, user, system. Then we have the resource type, or again, we can have several scopes, each one for a different resource type. It could also be an asterisk, meaning all resource types, not very smart. And then we have the various permissions we want, create, read, update, delete, and search. And the focus we want to look at is the filter. So we have here a few examples. So this is observation, read, and search. We have user, all types of resources and CRUDs. And we have the example we looked at before, a specific category of observations. So let's focus on this example. So we see here we have the syntax. I have questions mark. Now, what does the question mark remind you, syntax file-wise? That's a search. This is a standard search. So any syntax that you already know in FHIR search, you use the same search parameters for limiting your scopes. It's the same syntax, the same search parameters. You put them in, and this is how you limit your resources that you can access. So you put the parameter, you put the value, and you can, of course, use the ampersand to join several conditions, several limits to your search. Let's look at these examples. So we have here condition of a specific type of diabetes in this case, or we have an example of medication request when we only allow to create, update, and delete only ones with type intent of order. So these are more examples of how we can limit the access. So if I want a user to be able only to create, update, delete these kind of medication requests, this is the kind of scope I can allow them to access. So let's look at the use case. So let's say we have this app that needs to access observations. So maybe the app needs all kinds of observations, right? So it needs also vital signs, lab results. It needs tons of different types of observations. That's okay, but maybe, just maybe, my app doesn't need all types of observations. It only needs the lab results. Again, there could be lots of different lab results, and it will access all of those through the scope that I provided. So on one hand, we have a lot of data, broad data. Maybe that's what we need, okay, but maybe not. Maybe we can live with a much limited and matching kind of access. And typically, this is the way you should go, with the least privilege, data minimization. Again, supporting these kind of scopes you need to take into account is something that might be important to you, but it might also be something that you are enforced to do legally by law wherever you come from, because many national laws enforce you to do that. You have to use these kind of scopes in order to limit, to minimize the data, because you're managing clinical data, personalized, identified data that you have to protect very well, and this is the way to protect it. Okay, so keep that in mind when you manage this data. So there are various details about managing this kind of support, and I'm not going to get all of them. Again, you have a QR code to the documentation. But let me ask you this question. Let's say somebody has a scope, and in order that you don't focus on this slide, I'll go back to the previous slide. Let's say you have a scope that says, let's say, only observations of type laboratory. And I go ahead and I send a request, give me all the observations. What should the FHIR server do? Says Timothy, right? Anthony. Why did I say Timothy? Anthony. Tony or Anthony? Anthony. Anthony says, give what? Laboratory. Only laboratory. What else? What other ideas do you have? Again, I'm asking for all the observations. Says Anthony, give him just the laboratory. Reject the request, says Patrick. So what's the truth? Should we reject or should we only give the laboratory results? What do you think is the correct approach? Depends. And that's the truth. So we allow you to decide. You can decide to filter or not to filter. If you filter, do like Anthony says. If you don't filter, do like Patrick. Not personally, but yeah, you get the idea. So you have the control over that to filter or not to filter. So let's look at a demo. Now, in this QR code, you have a link to a community article with an Open Exchange app, and you can run this demo, each one of you, on your laptop. All you have to do is Docker Compose up, and you have Iris set up with a FHIR server with data. You have Keycloak. I don't know if you heard of Keycloak. Keycloak is an open source kind of OAuth server. So you have Keycloak set up, and you have a Postman collection, which I'll be using. So you can play with all this on your own laptops and try it out and see how it works for you. Again, if you get your hands dirty, it's the best way to understand. I always do that, but yeah, I get them too dirty. Okay, so let's look at what we have. So this is the Iris server. So you can see here I have my FHIR endpoint and I set up to filter results. I have my OAuth client. This is my Keycloak page. You see I have one client, which is Postman, which we'll be using as the actual client. And we also have Iris as a resource server. So Iris also needs to collect the Keycloak, let's say, to do what's called token introspection. Again, we said we're not going to get into all that right now. But Iris also needs to speak to Keycloak. So Postman will be talking to Keycloak to get the token, and then we'll be sending it to Iris, and Iris will be doing token introspection to Keycloak. So we have both of these set up, and now let's go to our Postman. And let's take a peek. So these are the scopes we have. So you can see here we have, forget the ones in the beginning, but we have user patient read and search, so I can access all the patients in a repository, but not all of their observations, only the run, again, the example we were looking at before, only laboratory kind of observations. So these are the scopes that we'll be sending. Let's get a token. What did I say my name was? Tani. Well, right now, I am not Tani. I am Alice. Alice from yes. Okay, so I got my token. I'll proceed. I'll use it. And now let's see. So let's start search observations. So right now I'm using basic authentication. So I'm not using smart. I should be able to get all of the observations in my repository. So let's send a request, and I'm getting 793 observations. Who can remember? Who's good at remembering numbers? Nobody. Come on. What? You got what's your name? Suja. What? Mike. Okay. Now, Mike, only because I trust you. Okay. So we have 793 resources. And now let's go, and let's take a closer peek. So I'm looking at the preview. Let's look at the first entry, for example. So the first entry, observation number 56. Let's look at the category it has. So the category it has is vital signs. So this is not laboratory. Now let's go for OAuth authentication, and let's send a request. And here we're getting only 385. Now, Mike. How many resources did we have before? 7. Thank you, Mike. 793 resources, exactly. But right now, we don't have 793, we have 385. And why do we have less? Because we're only getting back the laboratory ones, right? So if I look at the first one in this case, again, the first one before, remember the type of the category it was? Vital signs, right. Again, Mike is only good at remembering numbers, so I didn't ask him that. So in this case, if we look at the first one, we should expect that the category should be laboratory, right? Excellent. Now, let's look at something else. You know, there's an operation FHIR called $everything. What does $everything do? All the data for a specific patient, right? Says Shita. Excellent. So everything gives us all the resources that this patient references, right? So let's look at this. So again, I'm using basic authentication, and I'm getting all the resources for patient number 2. In this case, we have 297, Mike? Oh, he's writing it down. Oh, I understand. 297 resources. Thanks, Mike. And let's look at the OAuth. And here we have only 36. Oh, yeah. So how many did we have before, Mike? 297. So that's much less. Because in this case, now we're not only filtering out different types of observations. No. We're filtering out different types of resources. Because if we're going to take a look at the basic authentication, and we can look here at the preview, so I can see that we have here various types of resources. We have here the patient itself, of course. We have encounter. We have tons of other resources, of different types that we didn't have. So we're not only filtering out within a resource type different resources, but we're filtering out total types of resources. That's what we're getting less. Great. Now let's see another example, but for this, let's go back to our FHIR endpoint. And you remember, we have control to filter or not to filter. And I will not filter. Why? Because I am bad. In essence, today I'm behaving better. Now, I'm searching here for all the observations. I'm here searching for all the observations like I was doing before. Before I got back, if you remember, the 385 resources. Now I'll send this request again, and I'm getting 403. I'm getting forbidden. You are forbidden. You are not allowed. Why? Because you asked for all the observations, but you're only allowed to get the laboratory ones. So you can't get all of them, and you are getting forbidden. And what's interesting is if you want to debug this, and again, it was one of the slides that I went through quickly. So you have, for example, 2 logs. You have the ISC log, and you have the FS log, FHIR Server log. So if you turn that one on, and I did, you can look at the data. So let's just kill it for a second. And let's send a request again. And again, I'm going to look at, there's a global here I want to look at, the FS log. So let's just refresh here. It's empty. And I'm going to send this request again. And we can see here, if I go back to the log and refresh it again, I can see here, request access token does not have blah, 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 blah. So if you want to be able to debug your stuff, turn on FS log, and you'll see vital information there that you can use. And that's the end of our demo. Just quickly go back to the slides. So again, we encourage you to sign up for early access programs. There's a lot of stuff, interesting stuff going on there. Of course, don't forget to go to the app and choose not only the best session today or in Ready, but probably ever. So don't forget to do that. I don't know what people are laughing. And if you're interested in other FHIR sessions, so you have one right by here. Again, very important, petabyte scale. Elijah is going to talk about that. Then there's also the FHIR routing engine, the FHIR Explorer. Today, Linda is talking about it in a tech exchange, but this will be a session, so you can visit that as well. And if you have any questions. It is not mandatory to ask questions, even though Anthony said he did every session until today. But okay, so I wish you a question.
I noticed that it's not restful. A lot of the FHIR spec, I suppose. Is there any plans to make it RESTful? We don't need the .cruds extension, for example. We can just use the HTTP verbs. Are there any plans for that you know of? Does that make sense?
I'm not sure, because the FHIR API is RESTful.
Right. It's not.
Yeah, okay.
And dollar everything, that's not RESTful.
So let me clarify that.
I was just kind of curious.
So Kimball was asking, so the FHIR REST API, for example, all the examples I was doing were GET. If I would want to create, I would do a post. If I want to update, I do a put. If I want to delete, I do a delete. What we were looking at to create, update, delete is what you allowed to do. So you might want to come and do a post, and in your scopes, if you don't have the C to create, you won't be allowed to do that. So that's the scope as opposed to what you're asking to do. What you're allowed to do, what you're asking to do. So, I don't know, but it was a good question. It was help to clarify that. Anything else? Muchas gracias to all of you.